back in. I've lost track of time. I think this is hour 6, so we might be like right at the halfway point now of the day of conversation. And I'm excited to welcome in Mac and Kirsten to talk about eating disorders in the LGBTQIA plus community. And Mac, first of all, I have to give a shout out. It was 1 year ago today that we were in that hot auditorium at Northwestern, taking cover from tornadoes and sharing our stories of recovery. And it was such a special day. And it's so cool that we're able to get together again this year for Eating Disorders Awareness Week and talk about eating disorders in the queer community. So, Mac, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself first, and then we'll pass it off to Kirsten?
I'd love to. It's pretty incredible to think about where we were a year ago, to be honest with you. Kirsten, I don't even think you've heard the story, but we were basically in a basement for our halftime show at Northwestern University while presenting about eating disorder recovery through creativity, through arts, all the things. And I just can't believe we were in a basement. I still think about that moment every single day. Anyways, hi everyone. My name's Mac. I think this is number one, this is just such an incredible moment. Not only do I get to partner with Jason at ANAD, but I get to partner with Kirsten, who I've gotten to meet through Big Gal Backpacking, what I'm wearing my t-shirt, and through the community center. So a little bit two-parter here. Mac, she, her, out here in Boise, Idaho. I do some work at Equip. That's where I'm at. And if you haven't heard of Equip Health, definitely check us out. And Jason, I met through ANAD. So I'm on the community engagement board there, but I also volunteer as a group lead, and also I lead a group of group leaders. So love doing the work over there, especially as I host the LGBTQIA plus community. So if you haven't checked that out yet, please do, and check out our website and sign up for some free eating disorder group support. On top of that, I volunteer at the community center. I just actually joined to be a board member. And then I met Kirsten through Big Gal Backpacking, which is really what connected us through our eating disorder recoveries, and also just talking about diet culture in general, especially as it relates to LGBTQIA communities. Kirsten, I'm going to toss it over to you.
Thanks, Mac. I'm Kirsten Strow. I am the board chair of the community center, and also the founder and one of the hike leaders for Big Gal Backpackers Boise. It's a small hiking group. Well, we've got like almost 600 members actually in Boise, Idaho. And the whole idea behind it is a hiking club that's free of diet and weight loss culture. And I started that because it's like a lot of hiking groups, they don't really take considerations for different body types. And you're also constantly hearing about like, oh, and I'm here to lose weight or whatever, or here to get, fit, and I'm just like, I don't want to hear any of that because it's so detrimental to recovery. So we're all about what you can do with your body rather than you're out there to like look a certain way or whatever. It's about what you can do. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell. And married to a lovely lady as well. And we have 3 dogs and 4 chickens. So that's my life.
Well, that's amazing. And I've got a duck. So we've got plenty of poultry going around here. Mac, I guess we got to get you on board. So what could we get you? A parrot. I think a parrot would be really cool.
Oh yeah, maybe a parrot or a chicken. I was thinking about chickens one day. I don't know. We'll see what kind of lifestyle I'm leading in a couple years.
All right.
In my recovery.
There we go. Well, all right. Well, thank you both again for joining us. One of the things that is interesting about Eating Disorders Awareness Week is we see a lot of statistics thrown around out there. And I kind of, statistics, they get attention, but they don't keep attention. It's the lived experience. It's the stories that we share. And that's kind of what brought to life This Is My Brave last year when we had that, the lived experience. And the one statistic, though, that I wanted to throw out there today is that one recent study that I saw, LGBTQIA plus youth are 3 times more likely to develop an eating disorder. And I think that's because of a variety of different reasons, because let's face it, eating disorders are very complex in their nature anyway. But I would love to kind of just open up the conversation there and see why you think maybe members of this community are at a higher risk of eating disorders, and maybe some of the personal things you experienced in your own journeys that contributed to this.
Yeah, definitely. Kirsten, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Yeah. I can, sure. I mean, 36, and I know, experiences are changing for people as we make progress. And of course, now we're doing a little regression right now in the queer community. But for me, I grew up in a really small town, very conservative small town, very Christian conservative mother, and I I've I feel like for me, my eating disorder, which I struggle with binge eating, may be wrapped up in like just like lots of secrecy, having to keep a lot of secrets about who I am with my family, and just like I don't know, like a survival thing of um, I'm trying to think like why does that even develop? But it's like I felt like my whole self kind of had to be in the closet with almost everything I did. And a large part of that, of course, was my queer identity. And, I did the whole like come out thing. And my mom said, oh, she was going to kick me out of the house. Right. So I took it back and, just trying to protect myself and have a place to live. So it's kind of this like survival thing. And so, yeah, for me, it's the binge eating is maybe was a way to soothe myself through really challenging times. And it's kind of this burden that, and some people, like I said, in younger generations maybe aren't struggling to that degree, but I know it for a lot of people still, it can be something that they have to grapple with family and coming out and all of that. So, yeah, it's just it's a heavy load to carry, especially when you're learning how to be a person and 12 years old, figuring out like how do I talk to my mom about this. So I'm gonna go eat some cake in the closet instead. How about you,
Yeah.
Mac?
It's similar to you, Kirsten, raised in a really small town. I think a big part of it as well was, and I think about this for the LGBTQIA plus community, is really the intersectional identities. So not only, I mean, we live in a world right now where our experiences are invalidated, right? But then on top of that, for me, when I was getting diagnosed, I was actually told I couldn't have an eating disorder, not in the body I was in, not with the race I had, not with the socioeconomic class I was even in, right? And so it took my dentist to step up and say, oh no, this kiddo needs help and they need a lot of support, right? And so when I think about that experience and how much I was invalidated in that, I couldn't imagine living in a world now where I was coming out and then getting help for an eating disorder and being in this community, right? I really think about the climate and the political climate, especially, and how it's tying into the landscape of our care, right? And how we're being treated. So it's really, really important to be stepping up and having these conversations for these folks, because when I think about even being BIPOC, and being QT, right? I host a QT BIPOC group at the community center, actually. And one aspect that comes up is that I can't be BIPOC and also be LGBTQIA plus, right? Because then I'm holding multiple identities that I feel like I'm having to create safety for, right? And that feels like another task on their agenda. They look exhausted when they're even telling me about this in group, right? So it just, to me, it's really disheartening when I see where we're going, and I also see the hope of where we can start to land and start to progress. So I appreciate the call out for the regression and also like the hope for us to go forward.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I find myself at an interesting intersection too in the eating disorder world, because I'm a male talking about my experience with an eating disorder, but I'm also part of the LGBTQIA plus community. And in a way, I was a little nervous at first to start to share that I was gay when I was sharing my story, because I was worried people would think, oh, well, only gay men battle eating disorders. So I needed to make sure that, my full identity was represented and that people could understand, yes, gay guys can battle an eating disorder, but straight guys can battle an eating disorder. It doesn't matter what your sexuality is. Anybody can battle an eating disorder. So it's definitely one of those things where we've got a long ways to go in society, I think, when it comes to allowing identities to form these narratives and to form these stereotypes, and just kind of try to put us into a little box and say, you're this person, this can happen to you, this can't happen to you. The thing is, especially when it comes to mental health, we're human. We can all battle. So I know that the community center is doing a fantastic job at bringing resources to Boise, because let's face it, even though it is a big big city. Is it a city? Boise's city, technically? Yeah, a big city.
Yeah, it's a city. We'll call it a
Yeah,
small
a small
city, but
city.
yeah.
So like it kind of goes back to my conversation I was having earlier with rural mines, where the resources are very hard to find, especially in a lot of these towns. And I can assume, especially for our community in Boise, it would be very hard to find resources. That's why it's so great that you're there. I'm wondering what tips would you have for people who are out there right now who maybe want to bring a difference to their community, want to create these resources, want to be able to better connect their neighbors and their loved ones with resources, whether it's eating disorder related or just LGBT. I can't talk LGBTQIA plus.
You're almost on like what, hour 15 of hour 12,
I don't
Jason? So
even know what day it is anymore.
Well, I can speak to resources a little bit just as far as the queer community goes. We do have a resource center at the community center, and part of that, we now have the ANAD brochures and stuff that we can refer people to. But there's more than that. We also have a resource web page for people in the queer community to go to of just like it can be local stuff. There's also national information or more broad information on there about like, okay, I'm a parent of a new or a newly out trans kid. What do I do? Like, so we're a great place to start, but there's many resources available out there. People have different resource lists available online. And then another cool thing about the community center is we have a food pantry. And so if you're going through like struggling with food insecurity, you can come in and get food there for free as well. Mac, what's your take?
I love the call in there for food insecurity because I think about the linkage between food insecurity and eating disorders, right? And then also going back to LGBTQIA plus being at a higher risk for food insecurity, right? So it's all tying together of this kind of experience that it's telling, right? And on top of that, kind of giving back, right? You can give back to your local food banks, kind of to build on that food insecurity. But really, there's plethora of ways to really volunteer. I mean, I've really thrown myself into volunteerism because it's a way to fill my cup. But that being said, if you want to benefit from or give to, you can just, I mean, 10 years ago, you couldn't do this. It's wild. 10 to 15 years ago, like when I got on Google and looked up like free eating disorder support, it was pretty limited. And today it's wild in 2025. I mean, I look to Project Heal, I look to ANAD. There's a lot of just great resources that these nonprofits are doing, not only for the LGBTQIA plus community, but also the conversations we're having. Some of the resources that are going to be linked to this particular panel, right? The Trevor Project did incredible research around the stats that Jason actually presented on, talking about eating disorders in these communities, but specifically also trans communities. So the amount of trans research that has come out in the last few years as well is just, it's incredible, but also telling to the work that still needs to be done, right? So when I think about giving back, look to your national chapters, look to Meetup. Like I downloaded an app and I found Kirsten through an app on Meetup and went to Big Gal Backpacking Hike, and then found inclusion not only for fighting against diet culture, but then I found an LGBTQIA community on top of that, and then being able to build on a BIPOC group on top of that, and then going back to all these intersectional identities. If you kind of feel yourself in these moments and during this time in the world, sometimes I can feel a little exhausted, right? Fill your cup in other ways to give back to the other identities that you are a part of. Kind of what Jason was saying is like, I'm male and I'm part of the LGBTQIA plus. So how do I kind of go and seek out these male identifying folks and kind of have that community as well, right? Leaning into both aspects. Really fill your cup and give back to the cup. Make sure you're balancing it.
Well, and I'd like to add on that too that like, as far as resources go, like people are a huge resource. And just like you were saying, Mac, it's been really, I feel like with the hiking club, it's been really instrumental in my, steps toward recovery, because seeing that other people have challenges and you're talking about them, or that you're even interested in having a environment free of diet culture, like I don't know, just having people to lean on. I feel so much more connected to my community, and it gives me a lot of empowerment for myself of like, you know, it's okay to love myself. These people love themselves. They love me. I don't know. So yeah, really just getting out there. There are lots of opportunities to get out there and meet people who want to support you and want to bring good things to the community.
People are a resource. I'm getting that tattooed on me somewhere at some point.
Yeah, well, I
Nice.
think it all comes back to finding our people. And that's one thing that, especially here at ANAD, we try to do too with our different peer support groups and our different pop up groups that are identity based or focused on different segments of the population so that people can connect with individuals who get it, who understand where they've been. And I think on that note, one of the things that's interesting in our community is the pressure that we might feel around body image, or kind of how we view ourselves, and how oftentimes individuals in our own community might be the harshest critics. So where we go for support, sometimes we're getting the opposite. I wonder if you could maybe expand a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
you go
well,
ahead,
I was
Meg.
looking to you, Kirsten, a little bit, but the first place that kind of came to me is I'm part of African American and Black culture, and specifically Ethiopian Habesha. And in that, right, there's a lot of already hypersexualization that happens to Black women, but then on top of the layer of being LGBTQIA, right, and then dating other women who are kind of having this expectation of what women's bodies should already look like, it ties into that, right, of like, well, why isn't your body in the idyllic athlete body? Or you say you're doing that, you're a hiker, right? Why aren't you fitting into this body like type? Are you when they ask me, am I going on hikes, are you reaching for a certain goal? And I'm like, I'm not reaching for it. I'm just hiking. Like, we just go and talk. Sometimes we're only hiking. They're like, how long have you hiked? I'm like, oh, it was like 2 miles. And they were expecting like a longer distance. And I'm like, that's not what we're doing it for. This is just to enjoy ourselves, right? And so there's actually this, it's interesting you say that, Jason, because our own communities can perpetuate what's within them, right? And that doesn't mean we're pointing fingers or placing any blame, right? But it's all the same society we've been taught into, which is diet culture, right? We know with statistics that kids at the age of as early as 5 know the difference between good and bad bodies, right? So if you already know at 5 years old what's a good and bad body, imagine when your communities who are already marginalized get in there and are being perpetuated from other communities that are less marginalized, right? Those expectations are just going to keep showing up. But I'm going to have more to kind of add to that, but I want to toss it back to Kirsten.
I think one of the challenges for me my whole life has been kind of my gender expression. Because sexuality and gender expressions all kind of together, and with my weight, I've struggled with my whole life. It's very hard for me to express my gender in the way that I want to, because I kind of just like, I throw on what fits, and I also have a lot of sensory issues, so it's got to fit, it's got to be comfortable. And so there's something about like being recognized as how you feel inside, that limitation. And I don't know, I guess it's kind of goes to that thing of like, don't necessarily judge a book by its cover, because we don't all have access to represent ourselves the way that we necessarily want to. I don't know if that's a thing with everybody or just me. But it has been a challenge because, people ask, oh, you butcher, you femme, and I'm like, I'm kind of just myself, and you know but don't put me in a dress. That's what I do know, but they are comfortable. They are comfortable. But
It reminds
anyway.
me of Kirsten and I went on a backpacking trip over the summer last year, and there was kind of like a bigger conversation happening during this backpacking trip, and it was a specifically LGBTQIA backpacking trip. And Kirsten and I, when we walked out of that kind of trip and conversation, Kirsten's like, I don't know, I kind of don't like the idea of having boxes, right? And so to know that like these boxes are kind of they're put onto us, right? But then we take these boxes and then kind of perpetuate them and then ask each other about them. We're like, I don't know, should we be wearing dresses? Should you be wearing should I wear a dress? Like, do you wear the dress and I don't wear the dress? Like, we're already so confused and questioning it. So it's just such an interesting conversation. I also think this is where you have compassion for folks of like, people aren't going to say the same things or understand every single aspect about diet culture or how they're even perpetuating it. But you can do these call-ins, right? Loretta Ross just wrote a beautiful book about calling in and what it looks like to really break down this idea of cancel culture, but really like community building and community bonding and learning more and really empowering, educating, and encircling each other. So, and I know that's what you love to do, Jason, considering what your role is at ANAD.
I love community. I am all about that. And one of the things that I was thinking while you were talking is just a little bit ago, I was having a conversation on eating disorders and men. And we were talking about the term masculinity and how it should be plural because there is no one definition. What might be masculine for one person is not masculine for another person. And I think that's so important when we talk about the queer community too. What makes me queer might not be exactly your definition of queer or somebody else's. So we have to remember to stay away from those stereotypes because we're guilty of doing that even within the community. And taking that more plural definition and realizing that it's not so black and white. There's no right or wrong. It's different and it's unique for everybody, but together we can be there to support each other. And that's what makes communities really cool, is there are so many different backgrounds. Today alone, like I have learned so much and met from all of our conversations over the years, because we go way back now. I've learned so much from you. And that's what's so cool about community, is that we're able to talk about our differences, but also connect with our similarities. And I just really appreciate both of you being so open and honest so that we can, all learn more about each other today. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on too is it's interesting, as a gay guy, I'm attracted to the same body types that trigger me, that cause that competition. So it's a very interesting dynamic, because I might find myself comparing myself to somebody if I find myself attracted to them. And then it starts that negative spiral and it just goes out of control from there. So I always point that out, that as like an additional maybe caveat to the whole body image and gay thing. Like I definitely notice that happening from time to time. But one of the questions that I wanted to get to before we run out of time here, which I don't know where time is going, is why is respecting and understanding our identities so important to healing and to the recovery process?
I think for me, it's just been a lot of like self-acceptance that is necessary. I feel like for me, dealing with my sexual orientation was kind of like top priority, biggest emergency for my, survival, right? And had to spend a lot of time focusing on that, thinking about it, figuring out how to come out and do all that, like in my high school and college times. And so I didn't have the mental energy to spend on trying to work on eating disorder recovery. And now that I am at a place in my life where I feel comfortable and in my sexuality and safe with being out and stuff, I can now focus on the mental side of things I need to with my eating disorder. And a lot of that, like I said, with the hiking group has been learning to appreciate my body for what it can do, not what it looks like. And that has been so freeing for me. And I still struggle, and I'll probably always struggle, but it's been really freeing to me to give myself permission to be kind to myself and like love myself for who I am. Which, luckily I did with being queer as well. So now I'm on that next journey. Mac, how about you?
Not me trying to not cry right now. There's just something beautiful about
that. Whenever we can get Mac to cry, it's been a good conversation.
That's when you just know. Well, it's easy to make me cry. But that being said, I've never gotten to hear Kirsten's recovery story, but also talk about recovery in this capacity. So it's just a beautiful moment right now, just in general. So it's just bringing me to a place of just a lot of peace. But also I heard a theme that came out of Kirsten, which is acceptance, right? And a big piece coming out of my recovery is the whole time that I had my eating disorder, not being only invalidated by my providers, I then invalidated myself. I was like, okay, I'm in too big of a body to have an eating disorder, so I need to be quiet. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm going to make myself, if society wants to make me smaller, I will make myself smaller. You know, Kirsten knows this, Jason, you know this. I have a boisterous laugh. Like I could laugh so loud, I could take up a whole space, right? But if you would have met me through my eating disorder, I wouldn't laugh like that. I wouldn't bring myself, I would literally invalidate myself in every capacity. Not only would I straighten my hair, I would wake up at 5 a.m. and just straighten. I would take the whole culture out of me, right? I would wear makeup that was three skin tones too light, right? Just to make myself whiter, right? And so, in that capacity, you have to be able to understand your identities to really tie it to your recovery, because you're validating yourself, but you're also validating the fact that you deserve care, you deserve treatment, you deserve to be in a place of safety, respect, and acceptance, right? And by living in that, it's really difficult. And through all that, right, once I got to recovery, I didn't even know I was gay, right? Like I came out the closet because I hit a point of self actualization. I was like, oh, by the way, grandma, I have an eating disorder. I just hit recovery. Also, I'm done straightening my hair. I'm sick of it. I'm going to have big hair. I also have a big laugh now, by the way. It might scare you sometimes. That's okay. And last but not least, I like girls, right? My whole life completely. Like, she was like, who are you? And I was like, yeah, sometimes we change the recovery, and that's the beautiful part of it. So know your identities, validate them, and also be able to show up in them, because we're very intersectional creatures, right? And that also ties into me being hard of hearing and deaf, right? Like to know that like I'm louder because of that reason, and it's okay to take that space, and I don't need a justification anyways, right? Take the space to take the space. So yeah, there's just something really important there to not letting this eating disorder, but also society, just like make you smaller when you don't deserve to be.
I feel like that's the mic drop right there. That's a perfect place to start to wrap up our conversation. One thing that I've been trying to do when I talk to everybody today is ask them for the one sound bite. So what is one thing you wish other people knew about eating disorders? So I'll let whoever wants to go first can go first.
I guess for me, it's that eating disorders can be invisible, you know? Um, I, for a time, was going to this recovery meeting, and was thinking of myself as binge eating disorder, and thinking, okay, all people are big, but there were a lot of people in that room with binge eating disorder who to me looked quote unquote healthy, which is not a term I would use anymore, but at the time, 10 years ago. And it was really eye opening to me that we don't know what people are struggling with. And so it's best just, you don't need to talk about food and diet and all that stuff in like yesterday I was with somebody, and they were a real small person talking about how they don't want to get fat, and it's like the worst thing that could possibly happen to them. And I'm thinking, man, that person doesn't know what I've been through. And I just wish that we were all a little bit more mindful about kind of what we say, and the backgrounds that people have, that we just, because you can't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Such a great reminder. I think my like one soundbite, honestly, Jason, and this is what I say to every single person that crosses my path, is you deserve to heal. Regardless of what that looks like, you deserve to heal. So if anyone stands in your way, that's the one line you get to say to them, and you walk right past them, and then you continue to take that space. Because sometimes folks aren't going to give you space. So you got to take it and own it, and then keep screaming it. I will scream it from every rooftop if I have to, and every single hike, that I deserve to heal. And we may still continue healing throughout this lifetime, whether it be from our eating disorders, whether it be from our inner child, whatever it looks like, but you deserve to heal.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, and if anybody stands in your way of healing, give me their name and I'll go talk to them. So,
So this is 12 hours of conversation, and then on top of it, accountability by Jason.
exactly. That's tomorrow. That's what we're doing tomorrow. So, all right. Well, Kirsten and Mac, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I've said this before today too. This is only the start of these conversations. So let's keep it going throughout the rest of the year. I hope that we're able to keep this conversation going. And I thank you both for the work that you're doing there in Boise and across the country. So thank you both.
Thank you so much to you too, and for the opportunity to be here.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
All right. So that was another amazing conversation. Again, I want to thank Mac and Kirsten for that. I'm going to go ahead here and switch over our fancy graphics really quick. And then I'm going to invite Annie up because we've got another conversation ready to go. So let's see. Here's Annie. All right. Hey,
Hey,
Annie, how are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. I have been looking forward to this conversation since we first connected a couple weeks ago.
Likewise, likewise.
Cool. Well, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everybody who's watching a little bit more about you?
Of course. Well, first off, I just want to express my thanks for the opportunity to have a platform here to share my story and raise awareness. My name is Annie, and I've been living with anorexia, body dysmorphic disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder for over 20 years. And it's taken me a long time to feel okay saying those words out loud. So I think that alone speaks for itself. But today I'm specifically here to talk about my disorders, specifically through the lens of someone who was of Asian heritage. Um, and so, just a bit of background about myself. I was born and raised in Los Angeles in a pretty Caucasian community, a pretty Caucasian part of town. And so, for me growing up, I was usually one of maybe two, three Asian kids in any given classroom at any given time. So, I never really felt like I fit in. I always felt like I looked different. The clothes I wore were different. Cultural backgrounds, holidays, traditions, foods that I would bring to school were different. And I think, as most of us can unfortunately agree with, when you're different as a kid, it's not really a great thing. And so there was a lot of taunting, bullying on the playground for the way I looked, essentially for who I was. And so I spent a lot of my childhood with self doubt, low self esteem, low self image, and, just kind of dealt with that by myself. When I was in high school, a string of traumatic things just happened in rapid succession, none of which were related to one another. They were all just totally separate incidents. But over the span of 2 months, three different people in my life passed suddenly for different reasons. And looking back, what I know now is what I was going through was grief, depression, anxiety, and the beginnings of my eating disorder. I didn't know what I was even dealing with. I didn't have the words for it, and I just totally socially retracted into myself. I became really obsessed with food and weight and my body image. And so again, that was the genesis of my eating disorder. And, sometimes as these things go over the course of 20 plus years, it hasn't always been me at rock bottom. There have certainly been this fun wave of highs and lows over the years, including inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, leaves of absences from work. But what brings me here today is that this is all part of my own recovery and healing journey. And I say journey because I do believe it's a journey. I think it's ongoing, and I think it warrants constant conversation. I just want to raise awareness, especially within the AAPI community, where this is a very silent topic for so many reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. And there were many things that I could relate to, from the bullying to the suppressed grief and the suppressed pain. And I think that's why it's so important that we always have these conversations and talk about our lived experience so that people can understand that eating disorders aren't just about the food. They don't just develop one morning when you wake up and decide you don't want to eat XYZ. They're very complex mental health conditions that oftentimes there's many factors contributing to them. And from previous conversations, I've heard that in the AAPI community, especially, there's not a lot of language around mental health. There's a big stigma around mental health. So I wonder if you could maybe share from your experiences, what is the status, I guess you could say, of mental health in the AAPI community, and how openly is it discussed?
Wow, how much time do we have? It's a lot to unpack, but I think what I'll start with is just how taboo of a topic it is to even begin with. And so there's so much shame, stigma, and this notion of being a burden to your family or being some kind of stain or embarrassment. And so it's a very taboo topic. And so I think that already says enough, right? in terms of it's not okay to show up being your full self because we have this image to uphold. We have to be stoic. And so, there's this idea in our culture of also being stoic and not showing weakness. And so, when I was a kid and I was being bullied, and I would come home crying to my parents, complaining about the mean kids on the playground, it was dismissed, kind of like, it's not a big deal. Just get over it. And you'll be okay if you just get good grades and work hard. And I mean, that can only get you so far in life, right? What we need is support. We need validation. We need our thoughts and feelings to be heard. And I'm so glad that you raised communication as a topic because, for one, because mental health is such a taboo topic, I didn't learn how to even communicate that until I was in my 30s. And a good example of this is I'm Korean American and I grew up speaking Korean. And every Korean word I know, I learned in my household, except maybe the bad ones. My friends taught me those. But I don't know, I don't possess the language to articulate words or concepts like mental illness, depression, grief, coping mechanisms. Those are conversations I have never had with my family unit before because it's not a topic of polite conversation. And part of me almost believes that there's this avoidance. Well, if we don't talk about it, then it's not there. And I find that to be pretty painful. And, again, there's so much to unpack, but I guess the last thing I'll mention here also is this very strong value that we have in our culture and heritage about the notion of duty and obligation to family and expectations and meeting these expectations. And as a child of immigrants who moved here from Korea, for those of us who are first generation, what's hard is wanting to respect the customs and traditions of our parents and where they came from. And I do get it. They come from a different generation and time where mental illness wasn't discussed. There was lack of education and awareness. But we're also in a more modern society now. And I'm a Korean American living in America. And what I continue to grapple with is how to bridge that gap between honoring the customs and traditions of the past, but also learning to stand up for myself and take up space, literatively and figuratively, so that I can really show up as one me and not try to hide a certain half of me because of the expectation that comes from my culture.
Well, you're doing exactly that today. So thank you so much for sharing yourself in your story with us. It's very interesting because my husband's family is actually of Asian descent. So I
Mm.
have some interaction with that. And you're right, there isn't the language around mental health. And just listening to how his childhood was compared to mine, it's almost night and day when it comes to talking about our emotions or any of that, or also the obligation to family that you were talking about. So along those lines of expectations, though, kind of in Asian American culture and in Asian culture in general, what kind of expectations are there around body image?
Yeah, that's a interesting one and something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. But my parents moved to the U.S. from South Korea in the mid '80s, and at the time, the country was more economically depressed. There was less Western influence, and this is a broad generalization, but it is not untrue. But most people had a body type, and it was thin. And so for many Asian Americans, I mean, that's kind of the gold standard, right? It's you want to be thin and you have to be thin in order to be attractive and to attract a good husband and have a good fortune and a filling life. And it's funny how quickly it goes from your body type to having an amazing life because me now, I know how untrue that is. So that certainly exists. Um, and the other thing that I think about that really isn't discussed enough is the notion of body shaming. And so, when I was a kid and I would go to these family functions, it would always start with people pinching your cheeks and grabbing certain parts of your body and commenting on, how large you'd become since the last time you saw them. And again, when I would go home and cry and complain about this, it was just dismissed like, oh, it's not a big deal. Your aunt just does that. That's just the way she is. And what I find to be so cringy is how accepted and normalized it is. And We, as a society, as a culture, I hope we move away from the notion of focusing in on something that can be so triggering to a particular person. But it's this really unrealistic idea that a person needs to have a certain type of body to be a decent human who gets to take up space in the world. And I've just always had an issue with how normalized it's been in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah, the weight stigma and the stereotypes that exist there, it's disheartening. And,
Hmm.
I know also in your culture, the relationship with food might be a little bit different too. Food is a very social thing. It brings us together around holidays or get-togethers and stuff. So I'm curious, in your experience, what was maybe, like with your family and stuff around food or the relationship there?
Yeah, we were talking about communication earlier, or maybe the lack thereof, and so in our culture, I will say it's very uncomfortable for most Asian people to say to their family, parents, etc., "I love you." That's such a weird, icky L word. I mean, it's something that we don't really do, and so how do we communicate in the absence of using language? It's through food. And so for us, food is a huge love language. And I think this transcends Asian culture. In ours, I think part of the problem is it takes the place of language. And so if you show up on any Asian person's doorstep, honestly, before they even greet you and say hi, they're probably going to ask you, "Have you eaten yet?" And it doesn't matter what the answer is, yes or no. You will probably be invited in, you will probably be fed. And the polite thing to do is to accept it and consume large quantities of it. And that's your way of reciprocating and saying back, "Hey, thank you so much for showing how much you cared about me. And I love you too, by the way." So that what was tricky about that for me in my experience with anorexia is this notion of rejecting food. And so growing up as an adolescent, still living in my parents' household, there was a lot of conflict around the dinner table. And there was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of shame about, why can't you just eat this? Why is this hard for you? And so put so much time into preparing this. Why can't you? Dot, dot, dot. And for me, it was challenging for a number of reasons. And what I've come to realize in the years since then is that food again is a love language, and my actions of rejecting that food was kind of me rejecting the love that was being expressed to me, and that's something that I really didn't realize until many years later. And so, thinking about how do we resolve something like that, I think education and awareness are key. And so for me, what's been really helpful is sharing my why, which is to say, these are the reasons why this has been difficult for me. And in doing so, what that has done to some extent is to help absolve me of some of the guilt and shame that I felt because I felt like a horrible person. I felt like some degenerate who couldn't speak this love language. But, it's learning to express my own needs, it's learning to express where I'm coming from. And I do believe that to some degree, it's on. We have to meet each other halfway, right? And so I want to make sure that I'm communicating what I need, and I do hope that from the other side there is some semblance of understanding, and that's how we really start the dialogue. And I will say none of this happens overnight. Again, it's a process and it's a journey.
Yeah. Yeah, so well said. Because there definitely is a lot of places where we need to learn to meet each other in the middle again, and I think, yeah, there's no, it's not black or white again, there's not one side or the other. And as you were sharing that, it made me think of a personal experience I had where we were at a friend's wedding, and her family is from South Asia, and her mom kept offering us food and offering us food, and at one point I said no, and like my husband's like, "What did you do? Like, you just offended everybody." Like, I had no idea about this, but just imagine me sitting there, like, I've got the eating disorder voice in one ear, and then I've got this feeling that, oh my gosh, now I've let everybody down and I've offended people in the other ear. So I can only imagine there's just that internal conflict that you must feel in those moments.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. So I guess moving ahead in your recovery, what has recovery looked like for you? What has this healing journey looked like, and maybe what are some obstacles that you've had to face along the way?
Yeah, well, the obstacles were certainly, again, the kind of lack of communication. And so when I think back to me as an adolescent, I didn't even possess the language to know what I was going through, which meant I really couldn't ask for help. And beyond that, there was also just the almost the embarrassment of like, oh, how could I even approach somebody about that and show this weakness? I'm supposed to be stoic. I'm supposed to be capable. I'm supposed to be competent. And how dare I show this weakness? So it took me years before I even sought treatment. And it was in my mid 20s when I hit rock bottom. I was in a job that I hated. I felt like I deserved to be in a better place in life. I was in a relationship that felt ingenuine, and I was just kind of grappling with purpose, identity, and who I was. And so my ED really, really hit the lowest of lowest points. And I was fortunate in that I had a friend whose mother was a nurse, and she helped me see that I really needed some emotional and physical help. And so with her help, I checked into an inpatient program and got the help that I needed there. And what was interesting at the time was I worked at a mental health clinic and I didn't tell a single person what was going on or what I was going through. I disappeared for a couple of weeks and came back and like truly pretended nothing happened. And you think of all places, if you're working in a mental health clinic, that's maybe the right place where you can feel safe sharing that with folks. But at the time, I just mentally wasn't there. um, 3 years ago, I hit rock bottom again, and went took a leave of absence from work. And that time, I told everybody and anyone who would listen, whether it was friends, coworkers, people in my community and network. And I have to say, the most interesting thing about that is that I have spent decades of my life trying to keep these two images separate. This is ED me, and this is professional me, and these two people cannot coexist. And when I allowed those two people to become one, and I started sharing my story very publicly in the workplace, it was the weirdest thing. It invited the love, support, and community that I had been looking for my whole life. And if I had told 5-year-old me that, man, it's okay to be you and you can show up as your full self, and if people don't like it, that's a them problem, not a you problem. I don't wanna say my life would have been so different, but things could have been a little bit different. And so for me, well, it's been really the most remarkable part of my healing journey is this learning that with self-acceptance and being kind of unapologetic, I've actually found that people actually do accept me for who I am after all. And it's kind of mind-boggling after trying to be so many things I wasn't. I was trying to be white, I was trying to be taller, I was trying to be skinnier, I was trying to be all these things. And at the end of the day, it turns out it's just being me was apparently the most okay thing after all. What a lesson.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to say that I would play like a lot of different characters, and the hardest character to probably play was myself
Yeah.
when I started to learn who my authentic self was.
Mhm.
And I was just reading a book the other day, and the author kept going back to his belief that what other people think of you is none of your business. And it's like that's kind of exactly the philosophy I want to take through life now is like I spent way too long worrying about what other people were going to think of me. And, at the end of the day, there's going to be some people who don't like me, and there's going to be other people who love me. And I can't control that. I can just be me and let everybody else, make those decisions themselves.
Totally.
So, as we're, yeah, as we're about 10 minutes out, another question, and it's been a question that I've asked pretty much everybody so far today, but what is one thing that you would want everybody to know about an eating disorder?
Oh, yeah. Wow. One thing, maybe this has been offered by a bunch of other people, but I think it's really important to shine a light on it. It's that you're not alone. You're not alone. And part of why I'm speaking out is when I was young and vulnerable, I really needed somebody who looked like me to stand on a public platform and share their story and say, it's okay to be you. It's okay to have mental illness. It's not something that you have to hide. And so part of my journey has been sharing my story with other people. And what has really happened in the aftermath of that is this outpouring of private messaging from people out in the community saying, wow, I've been through, like, your story is basically the same as mine, or somebody in my family is going through something, or somebody in my community is going through something. And so eating disorders are sneaky things, they're out in the community and they're so silent. And that's a terrifying thing because of how damaging they can be, not just for the physical body, but emotionally. Just the amount of emotional years that I feel like I've lost just being withdrawn from society, being unable to engage and participate in fun things because my ED was so overpowering and loud. And so, if I can cheat and do another kind of one and a half things here, it's that there's life outside of an eating disorder too, and it's silent, it's there, it's hidden. But I believe that by sharing stories, creating platforms, elevating our voices, that we can break the stigma and invite more community. Because I feel like that's the beginning of where the healing really starts.
Yeah. Wonderfully said. Wonderfully said. And I'd even give you a second point if you if you wanted to, because that was so amazing. What advice would you have for someone out there right now who's struggling, who maybe they don't know how to start that conversation? Maybe they've got a loved one that they're concerned about and they don't know how to approach that conversation. What would you say to them?
Yeah, this one is one that I have a hard time expressing, but I do want to be really frank and forthcoming about it. But when I first started my recovery journey, I expected to find support in certain places. And that is to say, within my nuclear family, within my network of close friends. And it was disappointing in the beginning, but now I've come to an understanding and there's been forgiveness and all that. But I think my lesson would be seek community where you find it. And so for me, in the very beginning of my journey, when I went inpatient, I remember my parents dropping me off at the hospital when I was inpatient, and I could see them as the double doors were closing, and they just kind of stood there and cried and waved. And truthfully, I felt abandoned. I felt like, wait, that's it? You're not going to be part of my journey with me. We're not going to do family therapy. And it took me a really long time to forgive them for that because I felt like you didn't walk this walk with me. And what I realized in hindsight was they were going through their own difficulty. They truly were going through their own painful journey of how could this have happened? What can we do? They did not possess the communication, the education, and awareness of what they could have possibly done to help me at that time. And so, what I want to say to folks out there is that's okay. That's okay. And for me, I have found community elsewhere, this lovely community here today in my workplace with friends, with members of my extended family. But, I guess one bit of, not words of advice, but it's just in my own experience, what I found is I didn't find community where I would expect to find it. And so, where you find it, hold on to it and embrace it and let the people who support you love on you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about finding your people and,
Mhm.
find, yeah. One of the things that we're working on in the background right now is to try to find some individuals to get a support group going, whether it's a pop-up support group or hopefully one day a recurring support group for the AAPI community, because I know that's an area that you're very passionate about. And hopefully we'll be able to make that happen here pretty soon.
Yeah, for sure.
But
Yeah. And I think it's all about
and
I think it's all about finding opportunities, creating space, inviting voices. And I think in doing that, all of the stigma, the taboo, the cultural barriers, I think none of this happens overnight. But I think by fostering dialogue, normalizing the conversation, doing exactly what we're doing here today, I think that is how, over the course of years and generations, we can build an understanding. And again, I don't expect any of our parents in my generation to one day wake up and say, "Oh, I get it. I get it now." Unfortunately, we don't get the luxury of having that. And so, I do believe that if we continue to foster the dialogue, that's how we create change eventually in the world.
Yeah, amazing. And that's why we're having the day of conversation today, because I've said it time and time again already today. But this is just the start of these conversations. We're going to keep these conversations going throughout the entire year because they extend well beyond Eating Disorder Awareness Week. And I'm completely with you that we need to create more space to be able to lift voices up and different experiences up. Because you mentioned it a few minutes ago, but being able to hear somebody who sounds like you or see somebody who looks like you talking about your lived experience, that's what opens the door for others to heal. That's why it's so important that when you do get to a place in your recovery where you're comfortable enough with sharing your story, I encourage everybody to do it, because you never know who else out there needs to hear it right now. Like, our stories have power, and they can change lives. No matter what you've been through, no matter what you've overcome to get to the point where you're at right now, you've learned something, you've experienced something that could help somebody else out in their journey.
Yeah, and I guess on that note, it's the whole, it's okay to not be okay. We're perfectly human here, and we all have good days and bad days, and it's been a 20 plus year bumpy journey, and I will say it's looked like this and all kinds of stuff, and that's why we have community to show up for you and support you when you're feeling your worst, when you're fullest of your, self-loathing or whatever it is. That's what community is all about. We're humans, we're social creatures. This is why we're not people who live on islands by ourselves. And so I'm just going to make a shameless plug, but if and when the time comes to build this AIPI support group, you have my full endorsement and support. And I'd love to participate however I can, because we need more spaces, we need more platforms, and we need more places to shop from the rooftops.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's what I'm all about, is creating those spaces. So when you reached out for that, I was very excited, and it's something that we're actively working on.
Right.
So before we go ahead and wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just to repeat everything that I've said, which is to say, it's okay to not be okay. Find the community where you find it. It may sound like a funny thing to say, but forgiveness has been a really big part of my journey too. Just as far as moving past some of the, I don't know, I guess unresolved resentment and things that I had. But yeah, and I guess the final note and plug that I'll put in is, you deserve recovery. You deserve to live a full, happy life. You deserve to be free from the shackles of what an ED has on the stronghold of your life. And that recovery is possible after all.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Annie, it has been an absolute pleasure to share the stage with you this afternoon. And like I said, I look forward to keeping this conversation going.
All right. Thanks. Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, everyone. So another conversation in the books, but another conversation that we will continue to have throughout the year. Coming up next year, we're going to be working with the Hidden Opponent, which is an organization that's near and dear to my heart. I'm part of their speaker bureau, and it's really cool to be able to go across the country and talk with student athletes, because I think this is one area where we need to do a lot more. When it comes to student athletes, we often prioritize physical health and forget about mental health, but mental health is very important. And that's why I'm really excited now to welcome our panelists up here. Let me go ahead and switch over. Oh, we already switched over our design, and here come our panelists. So, I mean, everything's happening at once here. Hey, everyone, how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you.
Hi.
Good. It is so good to see each one of you. Since there are so many of you, I'll just go ahead and let you each introduce yourself and tell us how amazing you are. Isabel, you were the first one up. And speaking of traveling the country, I was very excited to go up to Maine about a year and a half ago and visit you all and talk to the student athletes up there.
Yeah, so I'm a student athlete at the University of Maine. I'm on women's swim and dive here. And I do a lot of work with the Hidden Opponent, and we have worked with Jason actually before, and it was really great. And I'm still waiting for him to come back up here shortly.
Yeah. Well, I'm on my way. I'll head out of here tonight, and I'll be up there because it's beautiful up that way. And also, everybody on that campus was super nice. I better be careful because I'm going to be at University of Colorado tonight. But I would have to say the students at University of Maine were some of the nicest students I've met. So, yeah. All right, cool. We've got Matt is up next. Matt, would you like to go ahead and introduce
Sure.
yourself?
I was going to say, I have a little speaker bubble already. So all jokes aside, thank you for having me, Jason. My name is Matt Stramberg. I am a registered dietitian. I am also a strength and conditioning coach. I operate my private practice called Matt Stramberg Consulting, and that's where I bring all of these experiences together, where I help athletes and non-athletes alike navigate eating disorder treatment, as well as disordered eating and problematic physical activity. And also in recent years, I've also started to specialize in helping teenage boys, young men, and men in general navigate these areas. So I'm really excited to be here. Jason's really great. He's brought a lot of awareness to these areas, brought a lot of great people together to talk about them, and I'm excited for today. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Matt. You were one of the first people I connected with when I started to share my story. Paula had to make sure. So if Paula, if you're watching out there right now, here's a shout out.
I'll be sure to give her the heads up.
Yeah. All right. Next up, I'll go ahead and let Betsy. Betsy, it's been a while, but it's so good to see you again. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, everyone. I am so happy to be here today and be a part of this important conversation. I check a lot of boxes. I'm the author of The Longest Match, Rallying to Defeat an Eating Disorder in Midlife. But I was a nationally ranked junior tennis player. I played D1 college tennis for 4 years at Brown University. But most relevant to today is my experience coaching high school tennis in Rhode Island for 13 years. So I'm just thrilled to be here and talk about this very important topic.
Yeah. Well, I might need to get some tennis tips from you because, I'm very passionate about tennis. So yeah, thank you.
You are, Jason. I didn't know that. We'll have to talk.
We got a lot of talking to do, Betsy, so we'll be in touch. But next up, I will go ahead and welcome Alana to the stage. How are you doing? It's been a while since I've had the chance to talk to you,
Yeah,
too.
I'm doing good. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here, Jason. We met through actually a mutual friend, and I've been volunteering with ANAD for about a year now, ever since, and it's been an amazing experience. And then I guess outside of that, I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I work with a lot of youth athletes, mostly middle school and high school. I do male and female, but a lot of them do tend to be female athletes. And then I also do a lot of work with those athletes on just mental performance and mental health, helping them just use tools to build their confidence on and off the field. And I also do that separately as well. So just trying to mesh together physical and mental strength.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for introducing yourselves. And shall we get this conversation started? I think the first question that I want to throw out there, and it's one I've been saving to the end for others, but I want to get this out of the way right now, is what is one thing each one of you wants everybody else who's listening right now to know about eating disorders? So feel free, whoever wants to go first, and then we can just kind of, bounce around.
I'll start.
All right.
I would like everyone to know that eating disorders do not discriminate. They affect people of all ages, genders, body sizes, and types. They do not discriminate.
And I think I can go off of that is not only do they don't discriminate, but they really thrive in secrecy and shame. So oftentimes we correlate eating disorders with a certain demographic because a lot of the time these people who are struggling with eating disorders are not what people would generally think would quote unquote look like they have an eating disorder. So this is why open conversations are really important because for many people, eating disorders, are something that can affect whoever in any stage of life.
For sure. And just to build off of that, I actually prepared like a response, but it's probably too much, so I'll try to keep it short. I would like to just kind of throw in two quotes that kind of really build on what people have already mentioned and also maybe add a little bit. One quote is, "An uninvited interpretation is an aggression." And the other quote is, "The map is not the territory." So what do I mean by this? We can't really enter a territory and just impose a map. And so conversely, when we're working with a team and we're working with an athlete, we can't just enter into that relation and impose our interpretation or our construction of how we think it should be or how it is. Instead, we actually have to really engage with the person in their context-specific situation and start to collaborate to really gather clues together about what is going on, how they're conceptualizing it, how they're experiencing it, and how they're navigating it. So, a common example that comes to athletes is, for instance, the DSM. The DSM is one map, it's one lens, it's one way of looking at stuff. But I often find that this doesn't really reflect a lot of the experiences that athletes go through. And this is especially problematic if we impose it with like a moralistic language. This often, as mentioned by Isabella, engenders shame or a feeling of misrecognition. So I'll try to keep it short, but really we have to be specific to the actual local truth and the local relations of the space that we're entering, and not we really have to like refrain from trying to impose one truth in one area onto another team. So we have to get to know the people in that particular context, in that particular situation. We have to understand their particular understanding of all of this, and then we have to build trust and rapport to explore this together, and really invite humility in the sense that we don't say this is the truth, this is how to do it, but rather saying, hey, this is how you're thinking about it, this is how I'm thinking about it, these are some ways that I've kind of been observing or experiencing, or this is what I've found to maybe be effective. Where do we go from here? And it's really extending collaboration and interpretation, so that way you can do the work together, as opposed to assuming that you already know what to do and what their experience is all about. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think it's really great what everyone's doing, bringing awareness to athletes. And I also want to put it out there that we don't want to just lump it all together in terms of, the eating disorder experience in one area is the same expression in another. And people who only read the DSM or online social media, they might walk away with that interpretation. But from my experience, we really have to be, client-centered and specific to the locality of that culture and not universalize it.
Yeah, I think, Matt, you actually just basically gave a very thorough answer on what I was going to say. And that's just that they are all different for everybody. What it looks like for one person, it looks completely different for somebody else. And they're so complex and individualized. And I think you did a really, really good job explaining that just now.
Yeah. All right. I've got a couple questions for each one of you, but before we get there, I want to toss another question out to the whole group. Why do you think eating disorders will often go unseen in athletes? I know that we see a higher risk in athletes, but also I think oftentimes they can go undetected, or they're missed by coaches or by family, by loved ones, by the athlete themselves. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Well, just speaking from...
I'll start.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Betsy. You're good.
Oh, go ahead. Okay, no, I was just going to say, I think that shows the importance of more education for coaches, parents, everybody involved, because I think so often the red flags and warning signs go unnoticed because those people working with the athletes themselves don't know what to look for. They don't know what is a possible sign of disordered eating or an eating disorder in the athletes they are with. So it just emphasizes the need for more education so that those with the athletes will know what the warning signs are and what to do should they notice some of the red flags.
Yeah, and I think going off of that from an athlete perspective, I think they're especially overlooked in athletes because often disordered behaviors, like such as restrictive eating or over-exercising, are common things that maybe are seen as dedication to a sport, not necessarily disordered.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that education piece comes in, is like we need to recognize warning signs of when it's becoming a problem. And I think especially in college athletics, that's a whole other conversation about overworking, obsessing over body composition. A lot of that can cause a lot of pressure on student athletes. And I know from personal experience that we feel pressure to fit a certain standard stereotype of what we're supposed to look like, how we're supposed to perform in our sport. And if we're engaging in certain actions, disordered eating disorder, that are helping us perform, they're not often questioned, even if those actions are unhealthy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, is it Isabel or Izzy? I'm sorry.
Isabel.
Okay, Isabel, you mentioned earlier too that they hide in the shame, right? And I think that for athletes, we can have that mindset up that like I'm not hurt, right? Like if we hurt our ankle, we're going to keep playing on that ankle until we can't play on that ankle. And I think similarly, we don't want to admit that we don't have an eating disorder, right? Like it can't happen to us. I'm not hurt. And actually, for me, my experience was that was my mindset, but I had a coach who knew something was wrong with me. And she like I was very lucky, I guess, to be in that situation because she caught it before I did. And she actually didn't play me my senior year of high school. And like at the time, I absolutely hated her. But I'm kind of going on a tangent now, so I'll kind of cut this off soon. But I think, yeah, one of the ways it could definitely go undetected is just the mindset that athletes have, right? That I'm not hurt or this can't happen to me. And I think part of that definitely is educated not only for the coaches, but just to have conversations like this so athletes as well can start to know what eating disorders can or can't look like.
Right. And I think also the team culture in and of itself can really perpetuate everything we're talking about. Even when I was a college athlete, which was many years ago, at one point we had this slogan, win to eat. It was sending a message almost that we had to earn our food by winning at tennis. I mean, now looking back on that, I realize to have that as part of a team culture or having to earn our food makes no sense and it's just going to lead to disordered eating.
Yeah, I was going to say everyone here has said really important points, and I think something that's really clear also relates to originally what I was presenting, which was essentially that every single culture on the micro and macro scale has their own understanding of what is true and false. They have their own understanding of demarcating health versus pathology. And it's also subject to change. And so when I say this, as mentioned by everyone else here, in one area, people could be acting a certain way, and that's completely fine. And everyone's nodding their head and saying, this is just what we do. Betsy mentioned the cultural aspect. It's just so key. If you're surrounded by people all doing the same behavior, is this wrong? And so then when you go to another area, it could be completely different. So I find that both with athletes and eating disorders, as well as with men, they don't really identify with or connect with the common floating representations. And therefore they say, well, I don't look like that, or I don't act like that, or that's a normal person. That's not an athlete, whatever it might be. And as a result, they go, well, if that's what an eating disorder is, I don't have that. And to complicate that further, athletes have often built up this image representation of what an athlete should look like and feel like and act like. And a big part of that is, in many regards, free from pathology or free from illness or free from sickness or free from challenges. And so to ask someone, do you have an eating disorder or do eating disorders exist, is for them to come forward and say, actually, I am inhabiting a contradictory position. And because they don't conceptualize that athletes can struggle. And so, when I talk to people, oftentimes I actually never mention eating disorders. I just say, how do you feel about this? Like, do you feel stressed about it? Do you feel anxious about it? Do you feel like you avoid this, et cetera? And when I had talked to them about eating disorders, they said, no, I don't have that. I don't identify with that. But then when I changed the language to something that maybe fits their culture or their world, they go, oh yeah, no, that I totally connect with that. And then in time, we begin to step into it and go, well, actually, this might actually be related somewhat to another similar experience. And so from that standpoint, I would just say, once again, it flies under the radar because everyone has different definitions. Everyone has different understandings of representations. And I think what's really critical is to get to the core of what's going on, which is this isolation, this disruption, the rigidity, the avoidance, the stress, the anxiety, all these different things. We can develop new ways of connecting with people and help them understand how to articulate their experiences. Because if we just put out one articulation and one representation, a lot of people, as already mentioned, might say that's not me, or that conflicts with my understanding and therefore can't be. And so I think what's already been said has been great. And I just wanted to add that in there, that is definitely a kind of hand in hand with all the different cultures and why we need to start from their context and meet them where they're at.
Yeah, Isabel, I wanna kind of toss it over to you for a minute to talk about. You shared your story with ANAD through the Journeyed
Yeah.
series last year, and it was really important to get that perspective so that people can understand eating disorders look different by person and experiences look different by person. And in your post, you had a line that really resonated with me, and it was, "We must value the person over the performance." So I wonder if you could maybe expand a little bit more on that and perhaps provide a couple tips for athletes out there and coaches too, on how we can value the person over the performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I did just want to say I really resonated with what Matt said about how like the environment makes like my experience in college athletics and college swimming and what's normalized in my athlete journey with an eating disorder is completely different than even another student athlete at another university also swimming the same events that I'm swimming. My team culture is different. And so I just think it's very interesting, and I really resonated with that. But yes, we must value the person over the performance. It's actually a big line. It's definitely my like mantra that I use when I'm swimming as well. I think that we're often believed, like athletes often believe that their worth is tied to results. I mean, it's kind of ingrained in them. It's ingrained in us that like, hey, you're doing the sport so you can perform. For me, it was you're swimming so you can go faster. And when I didn't go faster, I was like, well, I'm not perfect. That's not good enough. So that means I'm nothing. That means I mean nothing. But a lot of that value has been taken off of that because I started to find myself outside of swimming and find the parts of swimming that I identified with and why I started swimming in the first place. So my tips as far as how other athletes can value themselves more over their performance, which is hard to do when we're so closely associated with our sport and it's so intermeshed in all aspects of our life. But I would say the biggest thing that helped me is to find my values outside of sports, or find what swimming or my sport or your sport brings, like what values bring it to you. So for me, that was, I really love feeling strong and I love the way the water feels and I love camaraderie with my team and I love feeling like a part of the swimming community. And then I would say another big point that really helped me is, especially with eating disorder recovery, is as an athlete, you need to fuel your body with just gratitude. Like thank it for what you're doing. Thank it for being able to swim. Thank it for being able to run. Thank it for being able to lift. Oftentimes it's almost like we're punishing it, but at the same time, we're like trying to get better, but we're doing the opposite as far as actions. So I think a lot of it was focusing on how I can thank my body, how I can give my body exactly what it needs. I know as cliche as it sounds, like treat your body like a temple, but like not in the way that you're thinking, but like physically thank your body, have gratitude for your muscles, have gratitude for your strength. I think that really helped me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm over here taking notes right now myself. So kind of along those lines, I want to toss it over to Alana to talk about that balance between physical and mental strength. And I know that that was something you talked about in your intro. What was your personal journey like there, trying to find that balance and navigating that? And what advice maybe would you have for people who are listening right now?
So when I first read that question, what immediately popped into my head was that it's a journey and I'm definitely still working on it. It looks a lot different today than it did 10, 15 years ago when I was struggling. And that journey, like you hear that saying that recovery is not a straight line and that journey is also not a straight line. There's going to be times where I push physically, like past, like my body's telling me like, hey, you need a rest day. I'm going to keep going because my brain is telling me to keep going, and I should have taken a rest day, right? And that's also going to happen vice versa as well. But over the past 10 years, having experiences where I've made mistakes, I've been able to learn and really get to know my body and get to know what I need and get to know my brain, and also just have the ability to develop grace and compassion with myself when I do make mistakes. But yeah, I just want to emphasize that relationship, it's not black and white, and it's really messy. And it's like, it's okay to not be okay and to not have all the answers today. Um, and I guess that being said, any advice I would have for people out there working on that, I think Isabel gave some really great suggestions, like having those mantras for yourself. And I know that saying you said too, to treat your body like a temple, it is a little bit cliche, but it's so true. I think like we have one body, we only get this one body in our lifetimes. How do we want to fuel it? How do we want to treat it? I think that's really, really important as well. Um, yeah, and I think just the other thing with bridging that gap between just mental and physical strength, I guess, too, is there are tools out there as well, like that have really helped me as far as journaling. And I have mantras as well that I use. Like I meditate, I visualize, and doing all of those things and more, I think have really helped me be able to listen to my body. And also, like I said earlier, just give myself that grace and compassion at the times where maybe I don't listen to my body, right? And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Betsy, I got a question for you now that I'm dying to get the answer to. But um, what are maybe some warning signs from your experience as being a coach? What are warning signs that other coaches, trainers, parents should maybe be on the lookout for when it comes to having a student athlete? And maybe figuring out where they might be going over that line from just worried about their performance to where it's becoming an obsession and it's becoming detrimental to their health.
Right. I think that's a really important question. And it goes to what we talked about earlier is how necessary it is for coaches to be educated on these signs. Some of the warning signs with a student athlete could be a drastic change in weight as an athlete, more likely a significant drop in weight. Also noticing things like their whole personality almost changes, isolating more. They previously do a lot socially with the team, and all of a sudden they're just avoiding those social situations. And even more importantly, a lot of teams at the high school and college level eat together, and a huge red flag would be if the athlete is either avoiding those situations altogether or talks about eliminating certain food groups or does everything they can to avoid eating with the team, or if they are eating with the team, they're sort of playing around with their food, not fueling their bodies appropriately, and just seeming more withdrawn and low energy. It impacts everybody differently, of course, but if coaches know what they're looking for, it's really important that if they see these red flags, they know what to do once they notice some of these signs and symptoms. Maybe it's not an eating disorder. Maybe the person's just having a really bad time at home or in a relationship or in school or whatever. But the drastic changes in weight and how they talk about food and body image and their actual behaviors at team meals, those are huge. And as a coach, I would recommend you never want to confront your athlete in front of everybody else. You want to pull them aside privately or mention to them, can we talk after practice? And you don't want to be accusatory. You want to be very gentle. Use I statements. I'm concerned about this, or I noticed this, and let them know that you're there for them. This is a little bit of a tangent, but when I was a high school tennis coach and I did that for 13 years, I told my athletes the first day of a team meeting, I said, and this goes to the being a human being, not just being about performance, but I would say to my athletes, I care about you as a whole person. Obviously, I want you to do well on the tennis court, but I'm another adult in your life who cares about you. So if something's going on and you need an adult who's safe to talk to, please know that you can talk to me. And I heard about a lot of different things. In all my years of coaching, I dealt with so many issues, mental health issues, but never, ironically, any eating disorders. But I think it's really, really important for athletes to know that their coach cares about them as a whole person and that it's not measured just by their success. And again, I played college tennis at the D1 level many, many years ago. But when I was in college, my father was diagnosed with terminal cancer and given a year to live. And I actually learned that, I'm dating myself here, but I learned that on a payphone in the athletic center after practice. I think my coach maybe once asked me how I was doing, but nobody really cared that off the court I was struggling with this awful, horrific news that my dad was dying. And it's just a profound example of the important role that coaches can play in a student athlete's life, whether at the high school level, the collegiate level, and parents as well. Just being tuned into them as a whole person. It's not all about their success, their performance. And even when my athletes would say lose a tennis match, we'd focus on what they could learn from that situation rather than make them feel worse than they already did about losing. So again, I think it comes back to that education, knowing the signs and symptoms and how to approach an athlete who you suspect may be struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Betsy. We need more coaches out there like you. That's phenomenal. So thank you for the work that you've done with student athletes over the years. Matt, I kind of want to shift gears here just a little bit to hear. We've talked a lot about the actual lived experience, but what is the research showing right now around eating disorders in athletes? And in your work that you do working with athletes, what are you seeing right now in terms of eating disorder prevalence in student athletes, and also, I guess, just eating disorders in general?
Well, the research is very clear, and what it states is that a lot more research is needed. And what I mean by that is essentially this is just a very understudied area. There is a good amount of research out there. It just is not usually from the US. And so there actually has been a lot of good research, especially abroad. And what they have found is that there's a very high prevalence. And what they've also found is, speaking to what Isabel had mentioned early on, is that due to shame, due to secrecy, due to misrecognition, oftentimes people don't identify and don't come forward and don't talk about it. And so as a result, we can likely suspect that the numbers are probably even higher. And this is even more complicated, though, because as previously discussed, we can't even agree what is dysfunction, because one person's elite performance is another person's undoing. And so to these points, I think in terms of research, there are little samples here and there that give us a clue about prevalence as well as effectiveness. Myself, as well as Paula Quattromoni, we helped produce a research study showing how effective treatment is for athletes and effective athlete-specific care and what that entails. So it would be really great if there was more of that out there to once again have evidence that suggests why this is needed and how to go about it and how effective it can be. So there's that. I think also, furthermore, there's a paucity of research in the eating disorder field with regards to the things that we really care about, which is really understanding all these different factors in a wide variety of contexts. But I find that actually a lot of other fields, such as anthropology, and sociology, et cetera, they actually have a lot of good analyses of this as well. And what I would like to see is just more research in general, in addition to the stuff about prevention that I kind of hinted at, as well as effective treatment programs, I think something that is really missing, and that kind of speaks to what's been hinted at by other people with regard to the excessive focus on performance. I think one of the main drivers behind a lot of this is that I remember when I was growing up, sports could exist as performance and competition, and then sports could also exist as a thing in themselves. And I think as I've gotten older, the latter has gone away in the sense that people no longer play sports just to play sports in themselves, but rather almost all activities in our life has been reduced to achievement and performance, whether that's sports or whether that's even relationships or intimacy or all these different things. Everything's evaluated and graded, and it's performance driven and optimization and instrumentalization and whatnot. And when I talk to people all day long, why are you playing the sport? It's going to look good on the resume. I need to become I need to get on varsity. I need to win, win, win. Do you have fun? Well, I need to wait. Are you enjoying yourself? Like, I think it's a really lost concept. And I would be curious to see if there was research out there regarding, speaking to the benefits of sport for sport's sake, because sport used to be a very instructional activity in terms of teaching people the necessity of play. And what I find nowadays is that I actually have to teach people how to play. I have to teach people how to relax. I have to teach people how to have fun. This is crazy. I mean, people don't know how to play. People don't know how to relax and have fun. Everything has been reduced to achievement and performance and instrumentalization, a means to an end. How do I get to the next level? And a big part of this is also because the research focuses primarily on quantitative data. And so as a result, everything is reduced to is what is true is only could be measured. And I think, going along the lines of what we've all been talking about is I think it's especially powerful for research to bring forth qualitative, phenomenological, and discursive explorations where people get to learn about how challenging it is to live as an athlete, what it's like to live as an athlete, what really helps people from someone's experience, not from a data-driven, just saying, oh, they went up 4 points in this and 5 points down there, but rather like, as everyone's been sharing, this specific experience with my coach was incredibly impactful for me. This shared experience of having a meal together really changed the trajectory of, my experience on the team. This is stuff that's not necessarily easily measured and quantified, yet is incredibly important. So I think we've lost the plot, we've lost the narrative with a lot of sports. Everything in our lives has been reduced and conflated to performance and achievement. And so I would love to see research out there that continues to address those factors in terms of how to conceptualize, prevent, navigate, support, et cetera, treat. But I would also love just to see research in general that brings to light the need for building spaces independent of achievement, independent of performance, independent of solely focusing on, quantifying and optimization and instrumentality. That's what I see lacking in ESR research, and a huge opportunity, as evidenced by everyone speaking here.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I noticed as you were talking that we had several head nods in the panel. So did anybody have anything that you wanted to add on to that?
I think as a strength and conditioning coach as well, Matt, I see the exact same thing. I get the same answers from my athletes like, is your sport fun? Why are you playing this? And they're just playing it to get into a good college, right? They kind of bypass the fun aspect. And a lot of what I do in some of my sessions is to just like, for me, when I'm measuring at the end of the day, if I was good as a coach, one of the things is, did I make that kid laugh today? Did they have fun with me? Because when I asked them how their day went, they came in there and they're just like, it was okay. Like they didn't have fun at school. They're not smiling. So I make sure that they have fun. But then also with what you said with play, I've read books and research on how impactful the power of play can be, mentally and physically for kids as well. And I could honestly talk about that all day, but I think that's a little bit off topic, so I'll open it up if anyone else had anything to say as well.
I mean, I would just say that I see it still in college athletics, which is upsetting. But I also think that eating disorders are so interwoven with it because it's all about like a competition, right? And eating disorders are very competitive, especially in college athletics. You're doing everything to get better, to beat the next person. And you lose like hey, why did I actually start doing this sport? Why did I want to come to college to do this sport? Why am I on this team? What is fun about this sport? I just really resonate with that. It goes back to my values thing. I'm at the point in my athletics where me personally, I want to perform well. Yes. But I mean, I do it because I love it and it's fun. And it took me a long time to get here. So I just really hope that everyone in athletics can feel like that.
Yeah, I'll just add to that I think when we all initially at the very beginning start a sport, it is to play, it is to have fun. I think we're so influenced by the society around us, even at the high school level where so few are going to go on to play in college. It's that status of making varsity and what that means, or being a captain, and it looks good on the college application. And then when you get to the college level, that pressure to earn a scholarship, that pressure to succeed, it provides so many amazing opportunities and experiences, source of self-esteem, lifelong friendships, but at what cost? And I think it's really all about balance. And I think the true student athlete in collegiate athletics today has been lost because of all the money and all the changes in college athletics. There's so few true college athletes out there. But again, the flip side of that is you can't compete at a certain level without that drive and determination to get you to that level. I actually wrote an article about athletes and anorexia. My own personal dietitian was an athlete herself, and she told me when I was struggling, use those same personality traits that led to my success on the tennis court to fight the eating disorder. We have innate qualities that help us achieve in athletics. Use those same qualities to fight the demons, to fight the eating disorder. But again, at the end of the day, it's all about balance. Our sports can give us so many gifts and opportunities and experiences and friendships. But if it's at the cost of our physical and mental health, I think we really need to reevaluate. And that's why, again, it goes back to how we started, being a human being first, beyond the performance and the outcome.
Yeah, I feel like if we had a theme for today on all the conversations that we've had, it's about being a human. Like it all goes back to that. Okay, I'm excited because now we're going to welcome Aaron up to the panel too. This is like a record number of panelists that we've had so far for our conversation today. But we've got Isabel here, who's a I can't even talk anymore, but a campus captain. And we've also got Aaron from the Hidden Opponent, who we partnered with for this conversation today. So I was wondering if you could both just share a little bit more about your experience with the Hidden Opponent. How can other students get involved? What kind of difference is it making on college campuses?
Aaron, you can go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Jason and ANAD, for having us here today. We're very grateful to be partnering with you. So like Jason said, I'm Erin. I'm the Coaches and Professionals Program Lead for the Hidden Opponent. So the Hidden Opponent is just a nonprofit for student athletes that focuses on student athlete mental health. And like he said, we have a campus captains program and a coaches and professionals program. So Isabel is a part of our campus captains program, where student athletes at both the high school and the college level, at all three divisions of NCAA as well as NAIA, are represented. And they serve as representatives and advocates on their own campuses to advocate for mental health within their teams and for other athletes. And then the coaches and professionals program is a little bit newer. So that's what I lead. We have Betsy actually has been featured on it just a week or two ago, actually. So we just allocate resources to coaches and mental health professionals, and basically any adult that works within the athletic community and is working with student athletes. So that's relatively new, and we're still working on building that up. But those are our two programs. And I think I can kick it back to Isabel to talk a little bit more about her experience as a campus captain and how you can get involved.
Yeah, so like Aaron said, the Hidden Opponent is a nonprofit dedicated to advocating for student athlete mental health and breaking the stigma in sports. I really resonated with the Hidden Opponent's message since I came to college. And I started a chapter here at the University of Maine, and I became a campus captain. And I have seen actually and heard so many people have come up to me and told me how much this has made an impact on them. And I think that was really the goal of me bringing the Hidden Opponent to the University of Maine, was just, I just want to help someone who is like me, and another student athlete. And we have over 500 student athletes, and Jason talked to over 500 student athletes here at the University of Maine. And I really think that events that our Hidden Opponent chapter has brought to campus, including speaker events, conversations, we have meetings, we go do fun activities. We actually, our biggest achievement, which I'm very proud of, is we've worked with our athletic director and we've hired a student athlete therapist. So we have someone who's working full time that is in our athletics building specifically for student athletes to make appointments with her, which is just incredible. And I know that she's been a very, very utilized resource here on campus, but I think it's a really great resource as far as like peer-to-peer, athlete-to-athlete resource. I think that, yes, having a therapist is a really great thing. And yes, having an on-campus counseling center is a really great thing. And yes, talking to friends outside of your sport are, but starting the conversation within the teams and within the athletics program really can help break the stigma. So yeah.
Yeah, it was a really cool experience being up there. One of the fun stories that I like to share is that all the student athletes had to come in for the presentation, and it was really funny because the nighttime one, I could tell some of the football team was there, and they did not want to be there. That was the absolute last place they wanted to be, was listening about mental health. But about midway through my presentation, I could tell some of them were starting to listen, and that stigma was starting to erase a little bit, or the stereotypes were starting to erase. And it was just really cool to kind of see that look on people's faces. And that's what happens when you kind of have that peer-to-peer conversation, or just being able to highlight the lived experience. It can really make a big impact on campus. So yeah, everything that the Hidden Opponent is doing, I absolutely love. I'm always like checking my feeds to see what the organization is up to next. All right, so we will continue this conversation along. I can't believe we've only got like 15 minutes left here. This has been going pretty fast. But Matt, I kind of want to toss it back over to you here for a few minutes. Is what kind of unique challenges do athletes face in recovery? So maybe for other providers out there who are listening right now, who might be working with athletes, or just athletes themselves, what kind of challenges pop up along the way?
Yeah, I think we've already touched upon a lot of them, in sense of that there's misrecognition, and people often, kind of equate their behaviors to performance, when it might actually be something that is self-destructive. Something that we always talk about is that a lot of people actually take on what they believe to be a strategy for success, not knowing that it's a form of self-sabotage, and they only kind of learn that the hard way after the fact. So that's certainly a big challenge. I think also on top of that, we could talk about the lack of education, the misinformation, disinformation, the challenges across the board of just being a student athlete and trying to manage all these different things. I think people assume that eating is natural. Well, oh, all right. I was going to say Jason just disappeared, but he's back. So I think people assume that eating and sport is intuitive, and it makes sense at baseline. It's natural. this couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, just for a lot of athletes, they have never had education with regards to nutrition or training. All they've heard are no days off and just go harder, and so that's a really important point, because I think actually a lot of people are trying to do the right thing, but they have no clue where they're hitting, and they don't find out until after the fact. But even when people are struggling, I think a big part of this is, in addition to just the performance achievement emphasis, I think, in many regards, as kind of previously hinted at, a lot of athletes, really identify with just these common conceptions of what an athlete is. And as an athlete, I think the common conception is that they're only allowed to struggle in certain ways. So, certain things have, there's decreased stigma, and we have athletes talking about anxiety or depression. But even then, I think that they often come under attack, and also it's questioned about, are you fit for the role? I mean, that's always kind of the question floating around. So I think what also needs to be recognized is that a lot of people, in order to live with dignity, often live in denial. And it makes sense. It makes sense because in order to maintain this identity that has been assigned to them or they've created, it's really threatening to start to confront or observe these areas. And it's especially difficult if, once again, it's win at all costs, performance oriented only. So I think what's really critical is, in terms of these challenges, is when athletes have a space where they can sit down and talk with other athletes, and they have someone and people in a space who is able to see them for who they are, speak their language, walk the walk, talk the talk, and also is able to open up a space where they're able to enter the space and confront denial and not feel like they're going to lose their dignity. They're not going to feel like they're no longer a legitimate athlete. All of this, I think, speaks to the barriers as well as how we can potentially address this, which is essentially changing the conversation, changing the culture, offering different opportunities, developing more support with regards to helping athletes access appropriate training and nutrition and recovery, knowledge, techniques, all that good stuff. And as Betsy has kind of talked about, if we really start a cultural movement, I think actually a lot of these things take care of themselves. It's when that there's no culture, or the culture is fragmented, or the culture is antithetical. I think that makes the challenge enormous, because you feel you're crazy, you begin to doubt yourself, you feel uncomfortable coming forward, you feel uncomfortable talking about it. And once again, this just all goes back to extreme emphasis on win at all costs, performance above all. And we can see this across the board. I'll end with this, like Simone Biles, she's one of the best gymnasts to ever do it. She is having legitimate concerns about when she goes up in the air and does 20 flips in a row, that halfway through the air, she was starting to notice that she felt off balance. And I don't know about you guys, but if I felt off balance and didn't know where I was in the air, just flying through the air, I'd probably be scared that I might hurt, cripple, or, lose myself entirely. So she came forward and made a very actually wise, strategic move, which is to say, I'm not actually in a place to compete because it might result in me being crippled or die, which is totally fair. I mean, it makes sense, especially if you've ever been in that instance. And yet the whole entire culture mobilized to give her a lecture about not quitting and how she needs to toughen up and how this is an excuse. All, of course, coming from people who are armchair psychologists and have never actually stepped on a balance beam in the first place. So I think, we can still have, a culture, and we can still have areas where people are able to push the limits and then people are able to compete. But I think what, is the main challenge is there's no alternative. We need to have alternatives where people can know what they're getting into. They can opt in or opt out. And if they choose to opt out or choose a different route or choose something different, it doesn't have to be shamed or denigrated as weakness or, stuff like that. And, we just have to be clear here, and this is already mentioned. It's like there's no reasonable people on the top of Mount Everest. Some sport activities are inherently going to have risk and are inherently unsustainable and are inherently dangerous. And if people are making an educated choice, an educated decision, and they know what they're exposing themselves to, and they've done the proper preparation, et cetera, and they are able to understand what risk they're taking on, that's an adult choice. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are not given a choice, and it's just expected that you're supposed to be up on that mountain. And that's where a lot of people are like, I didn't feel like I had a choice. I was just exposed to this risk without even, feeling like I could say no, because our culture has really created a paradigm that if people say that's not for me, they're immediately branded as a loser or they couldn't hack it. And it's like, guys, that's the biggest challenge. We need to open up pathways for people who want to court, the tightrope dance, go close to the edge, but also offer chances for people to say, I still want to be competitive, but just in a different way, or I want to be play, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think a lot of the things I mentioned are really critical to the challenges that I see on a day-to-day basis. People are not informed of alternatives, and as a result, can't imagine alternatives.
Well, you mentioned something that made me, when you mentioned Simone Biles, I think we need to also remember that someone can be an elite athlete and also struggle with anxiety, depression, and eating disorder. It's not either or. It doesn't take away from your athletic mindset, mentality, success, perseverance, because you struggle with anxiety, depression, and eating disorder. It's normalizing those conversations and letting elite athletes know it's okay to not be okay. There's help and support out there. Your struggles are real, and you're a human being first. Goes right back to how we started today.
And Betsy, I just want to throw in one more thing just to build off of that. I think it should also be known that yes, elite athletes do struggle, et cetera, everything that you had mentioned, but it also should be known that certain types of activities and certain types of performances inherently are dangerous, inherently have risk, inherently are exposing yourself to mental and physical challenges. And that's that should be known, though, because I think what is taken out of the conversation. So a good example is football. There's been a lot of concerted efforts to make football look safe, to try to reduce concussion risk and blah, blah, all sorts of stuff, as if this could be sanitized. And yet at the same time, everyone's obsessed with, we need to win as much as possible. This is an inherently contradictory goal in the sense that we can't tell people that we're going to push the limits of human performance and win at all costs, and at the same time have minimal risk. It's like we also we have to help people understand that there's no solution, there's only trade-offs. And that's really what I talk about with athletes is what are the trade-offs that feel acceptable? And I don't think people realize that there are trade-offs to certain activities or certain pursuits. We've been sold the idea that there's a solution that fits all sport contexts, or there's a solution that fits every person. And what I try to do is help people understand what are the trade-offs of their activities and their pursuits, and are those trade-offs ones that you're willing to live with? And that includes, are you willing to, like, you have a history of eating disorders and you're competing in a weight class sport and you want to push the limit. Is this a trade-off of exposure to risk that feels like something that is appropriate and something that you're willing to roll the dice on? Because with a lot of different things, you learn the hard way, and some people are still willing to take that chance. But I think what's really missing from the conversation is talking to people and saying, hey, there's no way of, cutting this in an easy way. It's like, if you're trying to climb Mount Everest, it's dangerous. And this is what you should know. And I think that's kind of brushed under the rug as no matter what, as long as they get there, that's all that matters. And I think that's the main problem, is that win at all costs and not allowing to struggle. Betsy, you bring it up. We still have problems, but also in addition to that, there's just certain activities that we have to be aware of in terms of what are the trade-offs and the risk exposure.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for keeping the conversation going too while I disappeared. I have been having computer problems because I guess having 12 hours of live streaming will fry your computer. So my computer just went completely dark on me there. So I am joining by phone now, but we'll make it work. We're getting close here to the end of our hour. But one other area that I really wanted to touch on before we go is kind of that intersection between eating disorders, athletes, and substance abuse, because I know that's something that Alana, you have personal experience with. So would you be able to dive into that before we wrap up the conversation today?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And it kind of ties into what Matt was saying there at the end as well, and what Isabel shared earlier, right? Like you were talking about, Matt, how someone who maybe they have a history with an eating disorder and they're going to compete maybe in a sport that involves weight class, right? And as someone who is in eating disorder recovery and in fact did do that, right, and took that risk, I was in therapy talking about my values before I took that risk, right? Like I knew exactly what I was getting into. And because I had a strong recovery, a strong relationship with a therapist, right, it was okay for me to do at the time. Um, and one of the reasons I think that also has to do with substance abuse too is because I think that as athletes, and we kind of touched on this earlier, we have such a competitive drive in us. And for me, that can manifest itself as being very rigid and structured and routine and thriving in that type of environment. And both my eating disorder and my substance abuse very much kind of latched onto that and thrived in that type of environment. And then the other thing, there's two other things I kind of want to throw in there quickly because I know we are getting to the end, is that a lot of it had to do with that identity piece. For me, I was an athlete who developed an eating disorder, and I wasn't an athlete anymore, right? So I didn't know who I was. And when I went to treatment for my eating disorder, there was still just that loss of identity because back then, I don't know if I just didn't know about it or I wasn't exposed to it. I want to say there was no such thing as eating disorder recovery for athletes. I don't know if that was true 20 years ago or not, but it just wasn't in my radar. So I never I went to treatment and there was just such a piece missing. I really didn't deal with the athlete piece of me and I had a ton of anxiety still. So after that treatment, it didn't really get better, it just manifested itself into addiction. And it wasn't until I started doing like the values work and really digging into who I was as a person and my identity. That's when things started to fall into place. And also just being a part of a community, right? That was really, really, really helpful for me. I think like we're kind of touching on here today, just being a human, being someone who can be in society, who can be helpful to people. And at the time, I didn't think I had anything to offer to anybody, right? But just little things like holding the door open for someone or smiling at a stranger or asking someone how they're doing and really being present with them while they're answering, like not scrolling at my phone, not being distracted, just genuine connection is really like what helped me get over those things as well. So yeah, I think that wraps it up. I know we're coming to the end here, so I won't go on too much longer.
Awesome. Well, everyone, I want to thank you all so much for getting together today. We could have a full day of conversation just around this topic, but it's been an absolute honor to be able to talk with all of you today. And again, Aaron, it's always so cool to be able to connect with the hidden opponent, and I love all the work you're doing. So if you're from the ANAD community, definitely make sure to go give the hidden opponent a follow. They're a really cool organization. And if you're watching from the hidden opponent, come visit us here at ANAD too. We like to consider ourselves kind of cool too. So again, everybody, it was awesome to chat with you today. If you're watching at home right now, stay where you're at on social media or on the ANAD Day of Conversation page. We're going to go ahead and close this stream out, and we will start the next stream here in a few minutes on body image. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, just popping in to facilitate this transition. There have been so many incredible conversations today. I really can't remember ever hearing this many in one go. So it has been pretty phenomenal. So coming up, we have a conversation about body image with All Bodies Coalition. And here we go.
Thank you for joining us today for this presentation in honor of Eating Disorder Awareness Week. My name is Alexis Richardson. I'm a doctoral student in prevention science at Rutgers University. The focus of our conversation this next half hour is body image, and we have an expert here to tackle some common body image questions. Dr. Charlotte Markey is a professor of psychology at Rutgers University and the author of the Body Image book series, which includes a book for girls, boys, and young adults. Before talking about how to improve body image, let's start at the beginning. Charlotte, can you define body image and how it could play a role in the development of an eating disorder?
Hi, Alexis, and thanks for doing this with me. And so body image can be defined pretty narrowly in terms of how people think and feel about their bodies, but I usually prefer a really broad definition. So it's not just those thoughts and feelings about our bodies, but a more general sense of comfort in our own skin. And I think thinking of body image broadly is important because we know it's correlated with so many things, including our relationship experiences, our health behaviors, especially when it comes to diet and exercise, and also other mental health concerns, including eating disorders. And so we know that body image, it's not necessarily always going to be predictive of disordered eating. So individuals who experience extremely high body dissatisfaction are at risk of disordered eating or an eating disorder, but there's not a perfect link. So we know that some people who experience an eating disorder are really suffering when it comes to their body image, but not everyone. So it's important to keep in mind these things are related, but one is not necessarily imperative for the other to emerge.
Okay, that makes sense. But before we go further, can you define a related term? What is diet culture, and can you explain how it could impact the perception of oneself?
So diet culture is sort of a system of beliefs, right? So we're all affected by diet culture. It's part of our larger culture. And diet culture equates fitness with health and moral virtue. So it promotes weight loss. So any ad you see for a diet or any kind of diet product is diet culture. But diet culture extends far beyond that because even basic sort of moralizing about food, when we're talking about some foods as good and some as bad, that's really a result of diet culture, which has equated food with having this moralistic value.
Okay. Speaking of diet culture, can you also explain how one can move beyond diet culture to achieve body liberation?
So body liberation is another really broad term, and it's an entire framework also for thinking about how people live in their bodies in the world. And that may sound sort of strange, but we all live in our bodies. We all have bodies, but some bodies are treated better than others. And we know that people who are larger tend to experience discrimination and oppressive circumstances in all sorts of settings, including as students in school, in employment settings, and even with their medical providers. And so when we think about body liberation, what we're thinking about is getting to a place where socially we are not judged by the size of our body, that everyone, regardless of their appearance, essentially, would be treated equally.
Thank you for giving such a detailed response and explaining that. What steps do you believe people could take to heal their relationship with the body and food as well?
So I think it depends on where you're at when we talk about healing our relationships with food and our body, right? Some people probably need intensive treatment to heal those relationships. And some people might benefit just from reading a book even. So I think it's important to do some investigation, right? Really be honest with yourself about what's going on with you. Is your body image affecting things like whether or not you want to go out with friends? Right. And similarly, people often will tell me, I don't want to do social things because I don't want to be around certain kinds of foods. Right. So that's a red flag that you probably need some sort of extra support, right? That you can begin, of course, to heal your body image and your relationship with food by getting information, getting evidence-based information, looking at books, following mental health professionals who do work in these spaces, maybe joining an online support group. But you also might benefit from seeing a professional with expertise in body image and eating disorders. And ANAD, for example, who we're doing this for, they have a ton of resources, and you can call their helpline and you can get matched with someone who will help you sort through what resources are available to you. And you can even just look on other web pages and really look for someone who's a good fit for you in terms of what you need and what they can offer. Not every professional has experience working with these issues, and so those folks might not be quite as helpful. And if for any reason it turns out you don't have insurance or you're having a hard time getting resources given your access to healthcare, do know that there are some free options. And so you want to talk with the people at ANAD or another organization about what is free or low cost, because sometimes even a few meetings with a professional trained in this area of work can really make a big difference. So it might be worth, if you can, spending a little bit of money for peace of mind and your health, really for the rest of your life.
Thank you for going over all of those options and factoring in accessibility. But moving on from diet culture, can we clarify some of our more nuanced terms? For example, can you explain the difference between body positivity, body acceptance, and body neutrality?
Yeah, so it's interesting because as a research scientist, I think sometimes I define these terms a little bit differently than other people do. But that's based on different ways that we try to measure these different constructs and also look at how they're related to one another. So when we're talking about body positivity, right, there's been a lot of debate about what that means. But I think no one, at least in research spaces, and I really don't think most people, even who do clinical work in this area, believe that body positivity means feeling positive all the time, right? Like no one feels positive about anything all the time. Like that's, it's kind of silly to think that life is like that simple, that you would just feel positive about anything all the time. So body positivity, yes, it does encompass joy and positive experiences in your body, but it also means self-respect and taking care of your body and focusing on your functionality and your health. And it incorporates all of those other aspects of how we view and treat our bodies. Body neutrality is sometimes described as like this new approach that's really different from body positivity, except that it's not that different, right? What body neutrality has is it has all of those things I just talked about, right? Like respect for the self, taking care of yourself, being accepting of yourself. It just has less of sort of the joy and the positive affect surrounding one's body, right? So for some people, feeling really positive at all may feel really far off and just not like an achievable goal. And if it helps you to think in terms of body neutrality, like I'm just going to focus on taking good care of myself, making sure I'm nourished well, making sure I'm active and sleeping and managing stress and enjoying people in my life, those are all really important for mental health in general. So if you're doing all of those things, then that may look a lot like body neutrality. But guess what? If you're doing all of those things, over time, it's likely that you might start to experience some joy and some happiness, which then would be what some of us would at least call body positivity. And body acceptance, I think, is what it sounds like, right? So are you accepting? Are you sort of content with your body? And are you trying to be appreciative of what your body can do? Right. So it's not, I think it overlaps actually a lot with the concept of body neutrality.
Thank you for clarifying these terms for the audience's ease of understanding throughout the discussion. Can we discuss how culture, gender, and sexuality play a role in one's body image?
Yeah. So first of all, it's important to know that our body image is largely a sociocultural construction, right? We don't come out of the womb with this like inherent biologically driven sense of body image. It's really a psychological construct that develops through interactions with the world around us. So we live in a family where they talk about bodies in really restrictive and negative ways, and then maybe we internalize that and develop negative feelings about our own bodies. And so that's how sort of our surrounding or our culture, right? So our culture is a very broad thing, but also may be experienced more directly through our families when we're young. Okay. So culture is what gives us a body image in some ways. Okay. In terms of gender, there's a long-standing assumption that body image and eating concerns are most prevalent among adolescent girls. And we simply know now that that's just not true. We know that the rates of body dissatisfaction and eating problems have risen or at least have been identified more often among boys and men. They may not suffer to the exact extent of girls and women, but they're by no means exempt from these concerns. And we also know that individuals who are non-binary or trans may experience the most body dissatisfaction and eating problems than their cis peers who are identifying as male or female, because oftentimes living in a body that isn't treated as well by people around you or isn't regarded as positively is internalized. And so that can be just a really, really difficult thing for one to then make peace with one's own body. In terms of sexuality, there's some overlap in some of the literature here and how we discuss all of these different terms, but sexuality, we do know that individuals who identify with the LGBTQ community may be at heightened risk for body dissatisfaction and eating problems. And there used to be a belief that, in particular, lesbian women were exempt from these concerns, sort of, that they didn't experience them, that they had a whole different set of beauty ideals. And again, we now know from more recent research that's just not the case. So certainly our context is important, not just in the development of a body image, but the development of whether or not our bodies are experienced more positively or more negatively, whether or not the people around us are supportive of us really taking care of and respecting, trusting, and nurturing ourselves. And gender and sexuality play an important role in how all of this is experienced. So people who are experiencing dissatisfaction with their bodies or any sort of disordered eating or an eating disorder may actually exhibit some of the same behaviors. So we may start to see people exercise excessively, go to the gym really regularly. And of course, on the surface, that may seem really healthy, but if it's a real shift in behavior and it's a lot of time someone's devoting to physical activity, then that's potentially problematic. People may change how they dress if they're not feeling comfortable in their own skin. So they may wear baggier clothes or really try to hide their bodies. We also, though, do see sometimes that people may be insecure and may actually show off their bodies because they're looking for a response from other people. So again, it's not always the same how people experience concerns. Anytime anyone changes their diet sort of dramatically, it's something to keep an eye on, especially for young people who may be still maturing and developing and may need to, get the proper nourishment to complete puberty and to grow. So we don't want people to cut out entire food groups like sugar or fat or carbs or anything like that, because it's possible then that this is just one way to really restrict themselves, and that can be really damaging and people aren't getting enough nourishment or enough variety of nourishment. So there's a lot of things that can be signs, but I think also anytime you are concerned, it can be important to just pursue that concern in a gentle and constructive way, right? It's better to not just let something go and then regret it later if someone ends up seriously ill.
Thank you for such a thoughtful response. We've gone over the family system and the family environment. What role would you say the parents play in cases of young children struggling with body image in terms of how to best help them heal?
Yeah, parents often ask me about this because parents will often say, like, I don't really even feel good about my own body. How am I going to help my kid grow up and feel better than I do? And I think that's a legitimate issue that just a lot of people struggle with. So first of all, no, you're not alone, right? Like it's great that you're thinking of trying to do better by your child, and you are not alone in having this experience. And then I would say one of the best things you can try to do is work on your own body image so that you can set a good example for your kids. And even simple things like really making a point not to disparage your own or others' bodies in front of your children is really important. You don't want your kids growing up feeling like everyone judges everyone's body. And that's the message we give to kids if that's how we talk about bodies, right? And you may think often to say something negative about your body. Many of us grew up feeling like that was a perfectly normal way to talk about our own bodies. But you also may find that as you do it less for the benefit of your child, you think it less, and your own body image can improve if you're spending less energy disparaging your own body. So it's a little bit of a fake it till you make it game in some cases where you can really work on pretending essentially that you feel better than you do, and trying to exert some sense of confidence so that then your children will grow up feeling that way. And if you just pretend long enough, some people do start to really feel better. I think also, there are a lot of great resources out there for parents. There are a number of great books that have been written that are for parents. Or, of course, I'm biased, but I always tell people, like, I love the idea so much of the body image book for girls and boys being read with kids and their moms or dads or siblings or aunts or whoever it may be, right? Like, use it as a vehicle for conversation about these issues. So if it's a way for you to just start talking about this with your kids in a proactive, constructive way, I think that's really, really valuable. And of course, just make sure you aren't teasing your kid about their appearance, saying negative things about their bodies, because a lot of kids are very sensitive to that and they remember, right? Even kids who end up with eating disorders later, oftentimes will tell me they were teased by a sibling. Siblings tend to be especially problematic in this regard. And so if you are seeing that among, your children, you really want to step in and say, no, like that's not how we talk about bodies.
As a parent yourself and somebody who's an expert in this field, do you believe that schools have a responsibility in the health setting to educate children on body image?
Oh, what a great question. I think that schools can play such a valuable role. We know that a lot of kids are bullied about their appearance. It's in some research cited as the number one thing that kids are bullied about. And so if schools can really help there to have anti-bullying policies that don't just focus on gender or race or ethnicity or sexuality, but also size and appearance and ability status, all of this is important. And so schools can play a really important role in eliminating bullying among kids, which we know is unfortunately common. But schools can also get evidence-based information to kids. They have a captive audience. They have kids who are there to learn. And unfortunately, oftentimes the resources that are shared in school settings are not very current, right? That sometimes nutrition information is very like food pyramid focused or food plate or whatever it is. That's not necessarily, we know now, the best way to talk about food. And body image is hardly talked about at all, and mental health is hardly talked about at all. And media literacy, which is an incredibly important contributor to body image in this day and age, is not discussed at all really either. And yet that could contribute to any kind of public health effort to improve mental health broadly, eating and body image in particular.
You consider eating disorders a public health issue?
Absolutely. I mean, I think any issue that's a health issue that can be prevented or can be treated can be viewed as a public health issue, right? I think we're all too quick to assume that it only becomes a quote unquote public health issue if like the entire public is affected. But that's not really how health works. And I think we did see this during the pandemic, right? Like even if you're healthy now, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be the one sick tomorrow, right? And so even if it's not a contagious illness, right? Eating disorders are not contagious per se. You may be fine now, but it doesn't mean that tomorrow you won't be, or someone you love and care for deeply won't be ill and won't need that help. And so that's why I think we really need to be investing in public health efforts, things like body image education and media literacy, that can be preventative, and can also maybe serve in an intervention sort of capacity, because the prevalence of these concerns are such that someone we know will be affected, right? If it's not us directly, it will be us indirectly.
You mentioned that you wrote the body image book for girls, the body image book for boys, and you released Adultish. Do you have any other books planned?
I do. Yeah, I'm hoping to be working on a book for women who are in their, like 30s to 50s in the near future. And there's actually a second edition of the body image book for girls that will be out in about a year. And I'm really excited about that because it's gotten a little bit longer and has updated information, because that was 5 years ago now that that came out, which means I was really writing it like 6 years ago. So super, super excited for that to get out into the world in the coming year.
Those all sound very interesting. I know I'll have to be reading one of those books as your student. Um,
I don't make you. Don't let people think that I make you do that.
Well, I feel obligated to, doing research for you being in your class. I'll definitely read it. I believe that was all the questions I prepared for today. Do you have anything to add before we conclude our discussion?
I guess I would just say that people don't often think of body image or body dissatisfaction as something that needs treatment, right? They think that you have to have a serious eating disorder in order to pursue treatment. And I think that that's just simply not true, that we know that people who get support, and that can look like a million different things. It could be reading books, it could be going to support groups, it could be going to a therapist. But people who get support surrounding these issues and improve their own body image may stave off an eating disorder and may improve their quality of life tremendously. I talk with so many women who are nearly my age, or in their 30s or 40s or 50s, or even older, who still, since the time they were young, are experiencing serious concerns about their bodies and maybe experiencing disordered eating. And it's just decades of some people's lives where these issues take up a ton of time and mental space and energy and really wreak havoc on mental health. So you don't have to have a clinical diagnosis to get treatment and to seek out support for yourself. And in fact, it's best to not wait until you have a serious problem to seek out support and treatment. So we all deserve that, I believe.
Agree with you. Thank you for including me on this discussion, and thank you for allowing me to learn more from you.
Thanks for doing this with me.
Of course.
Happy Eating Disorders Awareness Week, everybody.
Happy Eating Disorder Awareness Week.
All right. Hello, everyone. Let's see. Are you able to see me? I can see Jennifer, but it looks like my screen is blank. So I don't know. Jennifer, can you see me?
Not yet.
No, so I am just a voice. So but I wanted to go ahead and give you an opportunity to comment on the video. You do a lot of work with All Bodies Coalition and Body Positive Alliance. So I guess kind of what came to your mind as you were listening to Dr. Markey speak?
Yeah, so a little quick introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Yu. I'm the founder of the All Bodies Coalition and director of community engagement at the Body Positive Alliance. And I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit about Eating Disorder Awareness Week and really highlight some of the key points that Dr. Markey mentioned in that video. I think what's really important, something that we can learn from that conversation, is that eating disorders are really complex, and it's really never a one-size-fits-all situation, especially for young people, because there are so many different unique groups that are impacted by eating disorders. We have minorities, we have mothers that may struggle with body image after having given birth, and more specifically, something that a community that I'm very involved in is, youth with eating disorders. So I think I'm really glad to have heard that conversation, and specifically what they have to say about how to create a more compassionate space for conversation, especially during Eating Disorder Awareness Week. So I'm really glad that that's something we were able to hear today.
Awesome. Yeah, and so I guess one of the things that I wanted to touch on that you had made a note of was around parents and giving them the guide to create those safe spaces at home and to change the language around body talk at home. So maybe what are a couple tips you could throw out there before we wrap this
Of
conversation
course,
up?
I think something that I've realized as a child, definitely even growing in an immigrant household, is that different cultures have different perspectives on mental health. And as parents, it's important to realize that the world is constantly changing and adapting. So if I were to broadcast a message out to parents across the country or across the world right now, it'd be to have patience and to listen to your children. I think the world they live in is definitely a lot different than the world that they grew up in. And I think that this is really a time that we should be having open discourse and discussion, really have empathy and to listen to each other. So I think parents making sure that you make space for those conversations, however difficult, and to listen to your children and to take it one step at a time. It's definitely not a linear process, but hopefully going through it with your child together with open conversation will make it a little easier.
Awesome. And one other question, and I wish you could
I
see me. I
know.
don't know what has happened to my computer right now. So people, you've been listening to me talk all day today, so you can just imagine what I look like, I guess. But the one other question that I wanted to throw your way was around racial inequity that you're seeing around body
Mhm.
image and medical field. So could you maybe talk a little bit more
Yes.
about
So
that?
I think something that I've learned from my personal story as a second gen Asian American immigrant is that within the medical space, there really are social inequities unspoken of that prevent certain patients from receiving care. I think certain stereotypes associated with different racial groups, maybe saying one racial group is more likely to have an eating disorder than another, or another racial group isn't as prone to having a mental illness. I think these different things can impact how likely, how comfortable a patient feels approaching a doctor for care, but also how those conversations occur within the doctor's office. So I think raising awareness about this, having conversations about these topics is going to be really important moving forward.
Excellent. Well, Jennifer, we're out of time today, but I would love to invite you back
Yes,
for
for
future
sure.
conversations on this because it is a topic that we
For
could talk
ages.
about all day long. And I promise next time I will be on camera
I
for
hope. I
it.
look forward to it. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for
Sure.
joining us for this and for all the work that you're doing with the different organizations. And everyone, we will go ahead and close out this stream now. We're starting a new stream with Feast. Hopefully you'll be able to see me over there. You can stay put exactly where you're at on social or on the ANAD Day of Conversation page. And I will see you all
Thank
in a
you.
minute.